Welcome, my name is Nick, and this is Nick's Fort, and today I'm gonna actually do something a little bit different than what I normally do. I'm gonna have my friend Keena, who is a youth lifestyle and commercial photographer, sit down with me. He's been working in this industry for, 10 years at least, and he crushes it, he freelances, this is what he does with his life. So I'm gonna sit down and pick his brain. I asked you guys to send me some questions, so I'm gonna ask some of those questions. Look at this, I'm gonna have this mic. Hello. So we're gonna get some good audio, but anyways, basically if you guys wanna listen to this as a podcast, you could do that. So like you don't need to watch the visuals. If you want to, look at me and Keena the whole time, then well, that's fantastic. But if you don't, that's okay. Just put on, go work out, do whatever, ride the bus, just listen. And I hope this is helpful. And if you guys dig this, drop a comment below, let me know what you think, give that thumbs up a click. And if you aren't subscribed, you're welcome to subscribe. I do filmmaking tutorials and filmmaking inspiration stuff. So I'm gonna have Keena come join me right now. I'm gonna give you this.
Oh, the real thing.
Come this way a little bit.
Okay.
It's gonna be awkwardly close.
As long as it
that
looks
way.
good on camera.
I'd say like get your arm here.
Ooh.
That looks pretty good. Yeah, I guess this will probably be good for the two of us. Yeah, it looks good.
Yeah, okay.
All right, cool.
Perfect.
Just introduce yourself, like what you do, how long you've been doing this, how you got into it.
I've been doing this. Okay. Like 10 years now? Yeah. Since I've gone since I took the leap of faith into freelance. I grew up in Boston, lived in Southern California after that, shooting skateboarding. Then that transitioned into how can I actually make money? Because skateboarding doesn't have any money in it. And then that sort of turned into commercially shooting youth lifestyle, which is anything fun, but that also includes skateboarding. So then learning how to apply that to shooting for larger clients that aren't necessarily skateboarding clients, but want to bring that youthful energy and optimism to what they're selling.
And then how did you get into photography, like in the beginning? Like when did it all start?
Probably in high school, they make you choose like what you're going to do for the rest of your life. Apply to college. What are you going to do?
Obviously.
And I was just like, oh, well, I just want to skateboard some more, but I'm not that good at it. But if I become a photographer, then I get to hang out with skaters all day. That sounds like a pretty good plan. And I sort of feel like I won the lottery that what I chose then is still what I love to do because, it's the natural evolution of everybody to just like change their interests. But that was a long time ago that I was in high school, but still absolutely love it. So
yeah, maybe we can talk a little bit more about like what you just said, where you're saying that you feel like you got lucky in choosing something then that you still love now. And I think there's something to be like looking at like how, I know I struggle with figuring out what I really want to do with my life, right? What do I do when I grow up, like you kind of said. So talk a little bit about how you figured that out and how that kind of came to be. Because, you can be a photographer, but we were talking about this earlier where it's just like you need a niche and that niche needs to be pretty tight. Mm-hmm. So how do you find that niche? How do you pick that niche? How do you stick with that niche and not kind of be tempted to like kind of shoot everything?
That is definitely the tricky part. I mean, I think it started off, what do I love to do? Or what do I want to do for fun? All right, I just want to skateboard and shoot it with a camera. And so it was just like the most innocent choice to chase after that. So I think that was actually a good way to start, that it was just all about like, how do you want to enjoy life? I wasn't thinking like, how do you want to make money? Or I didn't think, how do you want to be responsible? It was just like, how's life going to be fun? All right, go after that. And then, of course, in the beginning, it was shooting everything, absolutely everything, and really not honing the vision. I mean, after skateboarding, then it was trying to shoot a wider breadth of stuff just to sample everything, try one of everything, and then see what sticks, which I think is the way to do it when you're starting off. Just like sample everything, try everything. Anything you try, you're going to learn something from. And then eventually, like, you're going to stumble upon that thing that's just like, oh, actually, this is what I love shooting. All right, now I'm going to take all that stuff I learned from shooting senior portraits or shooting weddings and like all the skills that you need to for quick thinking, knowing all your tools, the camera, the lighting, all of that. But after you've exercised that so much and learned it, all the technical stuff, then you just keep sampling everything until it, it's like falling in love. Like, when it hits you.
I was going to actually compare it to when you go to like on the East Coast is Cabot and on the West Coast it's Tillamook. They're cheese manufacturers.
Mm-hmm.
When you go there, you sample all the different cheeses until you figure out which one you really love.
Boom. And you're like, you're like, no, this, like, I didn't know I loved this, but now I've had it. I love this.
This is the cheese.
And I think that's the same way with, knowing what you're going to do with photo or video. Like, you try everything until like, you're like, actually, there's no question about it. This is what I love.
Yeah.
And then you can sort of like redefine yourself. And then, if you're like marketing or on a website, like suddenly all the senior portraits, all like the weddings, everything else that's not in that vein, that niche of what you're going after. Like it hurts to like trim the fat, but then you look so much stronger as a professional and as like that person that shoots that thing.
Yeah. I think that there's something like, I'm going to turn like this. There's something kind of interesting in that regard where it's like, maybe I'm wrong about this, but I feel like sometimes there's like a stigma about doing a certain thing where it's like, I don't shoot weddings because I don't shoot weddings. I don't want to be a wedding photographer. I don't shoot senior portraits because I don't want to be a senior portrait photographer. And same with filmmaking, right? So it's like, I don't do wedding films. And like, I did that. And I regret it because I think what you're saying now is super valuable. It's like in the beginning, just do stuff. And like, it doesn't have to define what you end up doing in 10 years because you can kind of get rid of all of that and say, just going to focus on, lifestyle, youth, skateboarding, like driven content, right? Like, and that's not necessarily what you do, but it's rooted in that. But like, doesn't mean you didn't do all this other stuff to like find your way on that path to land there.
For sure. I feel like even shooting weddings, like I learned so much quick thinking because that's like a one take shoot. Like if you want a high pressure situation to develop your skills, like to make sure you don't F up.
Yeah.
Like weddings is pretty high pressure.
Yeah.
So you're gonna like know when to use a flash, how to do it quickly, how to do it quietly, and all of that applies to shooting commercially after that. And you can, when you're first starting off, shooting anything with a camera is good for you. Whether it's what you love to do, like you're still using that tool that you want to use further down the road in that niche of shooting that specific thing. But your side hustle you have to make money. So shooting stuff like weddings on the weekends, then you make a boatload of money, and then you can work free jobs just shooting photo for anybody for 5 days.
Right.
And then that, now, okay, I think that helps start off like, oh, what I want to do is shoot for these surf brands. But at first, you don't have a book to show them. But if you offer your services for free, then they're like, all right, what do you have to lose? So you're going to do anything you can to just put cash in your pocket on the weekends, pay your rent, and then have free time and the ambition to like offer your services to practice all these different, your dreams, but on like a smaller scale.
Well, and so as you're talking about that, so you get to that point and you're like, all right, I'm going to do surf photography. That's what I'm going to do, right? And like for you feel like I don't want to assume this, but it seems like you kind of know what you want to do with your work. And correct me if I'm wrong, but now that you're there, do you still have this urge to go kind of do this off weird other stuff, right? That's like not on brand for you, but it still allows you to be creative. Like I saw Keena in New York a couple of weeks ago, and we went to this like book fair, and we were looking at all these crazy books and like a lot of photography books and zines and stuff like that. And there was just some really kind of wacky out there stuff that people were doing and publishing. Do you find yourself like being like, cool, here's my commercial work, I love it, and I'm into it, but still doing these other things?
Oh, I think it's the only way to like keep your sanity. Just pretend you're still in high school. Like, all right, what are you gonna do for fun? Like, especially once you get into commercial work and just like working within the box of you're working either with creative directors or what the client really needs for their campaign, which is good, which is awesome. But at the same time, it might not be as personal or out there, So I feel like it's important to keep exercising like those parts of your brain so you don't stifle it and just become Mr. Commercial.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, yeah, you don't want to become soulless Mr. Commercial, And I think that exercising your personal side projects is so important to keeping your brain as pure as it was when you were starting to get into commercial. And that's probably like your success is probably based off of how your brain was working then before you had success, So I feel like if you work just commercially after that and don't do what you were doing on your come up, then you sort of become a different person.
Right.
And you might lose your flavor that what made you stand out in the first place. You don't want to get swept into the river of everybody else and then suddenly you don't stand out, which could happen if you're just like commercial success and then you just get bland.
Yeah.
So yeah, going to book fairs and like seeing photo books, sometimes you lose sight of like the personal projects and then you see somebody else and it's like, oh, they just published a book and every single photo is just a photo of a pine tree. Like that's not my style, but that's amazing that they got off the highway, they took that road and they went all the way and then they pulled the trigger on getting published as a book. Like that's amazing. Yeah. That's inspiring, like, which is also refreshing to be like, just a book of pine trees, but this is inspiring to me as a professional creative, like to make sure that you can still appreciate all avenues of the arts like that.
Sure. I did ask for people to send some questions, so maybe we can. I don't want to skip those.
All right, get it.
So let's go with Ashley asked, "What is the biggest influence on your photography, videography techniques?" And for you, I guess that would be photography and directing because you have recently started getting into directing video. So yeah, what would be the biggest influence on your techniques for that?
On techniques.
Yeah, maybe first define techniques for this conversation for yourself. She didn't define it.
Okay.
And I think, I'm not sure how, I don't know how you want to define that.
I mean, I guess techniques are sort of like the building blocks to your style or your flavor. Your techniques of camera angles, lighting, editing, post. I'm assuming that would be your techniques.
And then what's the biggest influence on that?
I'm super inspired. I mean, when I was assisting coming up, it was the early 2000s and it was the age of perfection, like 20 lights on one person, like gobos between the light and the person to get the shadows and then the highlights, and it was just so much overly done, like such precision, so much control. And then I think being inspired by like some of the magnum photographers of the 60s and 70s, looking back at photos that have stuck with me and sort of like hitting the reset on my brain, like after going to school, after assisting, like, oh, actually still the photos that have stuck with me can be natural light, might be blurry, might be, somebody running down the street in New York or something like that. And it's just like, oh, okay, that wasn't lit. That wasn't even perfectly in focus, but that's the thing that's resonated with me and it's 50 years old. That's pretty amazing. So some of the old editorial photographers, seeing stuff, documentary photographers, the people that sort of like experience a lot of real life and were capturing that, I think has a lot of influence on what I try to inject into my like commercial work.
Right.
And then I feel like I also love like really well-made magazines and photo books, and a lot of that comes out of like skateboarding scenes in Australia and France.
So taking that documentary style that embraces imperfection and applying that to a commercial atmosphere.
Yeah.
And also I think on your website I was reading, it's like talking about like how powerful a simple image can be. And I think that could also, apply to like the literal like crew size and the gear and all that stuff. But composition, all those different things, thinking about, like it doesn't have to be this huge thing.
No, not at all. It's the opposite. Yeah. And it's good to, I've got like sticky notes around my computer to remind me, like, don't get swept up. Don't think like it has to be super produced. It doesn't have to be super planned. Some of the best photos are just because a photographer like pulled the trigger. So just walk out the front door and like use your camera.
Yeah.
Then you could get the best image of your life, Like stop worrying about, I don't have this flash, I don't have the right camera. Just the person that pulled the trigger is in the front of the pack. Like they're the most powerful, whatever camera it has, even if it's with their phone.
And do you think that works? My gut is that works because if it's done right, it's authentic and it has this like realness that you couldn't take a crew of 100 people and every single resource you could and recreate the authenticity that you can get in like that doc style.
Right. I mean, if you've got, all this lighting and then you've got a creative agency and a client and you've got 30 people behind the photographer and you're trying to shoot a person or a group of people doing something, like, having 100 eyes on you is definitely going to change how they react, how they act.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like when you can strip it down, that you do get this much more relatable image that the viewer afterwards is going to just see that glimmer in their eyes of the talent on set. That's going to be, much realer feeling than anything that's super produced or superposed.
Mm. Yeah, I love that. I mean, I personally love, like, I'm like into doc style, so I definitely can relate to that. And it's kind of like, it's a hard thing to, in the beginning of as a creative, for me, it was really hard in the beginning not to want to go in that direction of using a lot of everything.
Totally.
And like be like,
the
we need all
there.
these lights and we need all these cards to cut the light. We got to do all this stuff. And then, I think eventually you might step back and be like, wait, no, I don't. I just need this key light and a negative fill right here. And then that's it.
Boom. And something way more powerful comes out of it.
Right. And it's like, you can get away with not having a lot, but I also don't think that there's like, what do you think about like that idea, but not as like a shortcut? So it's like, is it valuable to go through the process of using a lot of equipment and trying to like do all this stuff with all these things, and then realize you're like, well, I don't actually need that?
I think it's important, to know. I mean, personally, it was good to exercise that process and know how to use all those lights and how to do all that. But again, it's like sampling everything. Once I went down that road, then I was able to come back and be like, oh, I tried everything. Oh, I tried too many lights. Not really like what I love. All right, now I know what I love is super simple. All right, get to go back that way. And I think that's what helps you hone in, your flavor and what you're selling as your personality, what you bring your eye to everything.
And I think that's an important thing that you just said, where you said that's what I love. So the idea of using a bunch of lights in a big crew is not bad. Right. It's not a bad thing, mm-hmm. but it's not your thing, and that's not why you get hired. So that kind of is refreshing to know as a creative. If you're going to get into a creative field like a filmmaker and photography, like you do you, and you do you long enough, then that's why you get hired versus doing what you think you're supposed to do or what you see other people doing. For sure. And stuff like that.
For sure. I mean, even nowadays, I can get hired by a big agency or a big client to do that simple image, but there's still 40 people on set that are still going to, there's going to be hair and makeup, there's going to be wardrobe. But then knowing, okay, well, we can't have this half moon of people all staring at the talent as I'm shooting. So let's just have, all right, everybody's going to be over here, like behind this wall, and then we can create this and the subject like interacting somehow, and then the digi's going to download it, and then we can show you what we're getting. So that way, brings it to a big production, but the simplicity of it is still there, and trying to keep that magic. That is why you got hired in the first place,
Yeah. All right, I'm going to see. So I've got a question on here. It's like, how do I consider the golden ratio? And this guy, his name's Kamal, and he's talking about the golden spiral, which is a composition technique that I recently have become super obsessed with. I don't know if it's still on here, but I'll show you the.
Wait, is that
So
the thing
like,
that's in
yeah,
shells?
it's like that right
oh,
there,
yes, yeah.
right? So
Mhm.
like that's the golden spiral.
Oh, interesting.
And I'll pop an image up here on this so you guys can see that. But like I've just kind of become obsessed with this as like a composition tool, and he's just saying how do I use that when you're actually taking a photo, and I might answer that if you don't want to, because it's not like that grid is on my camera, and maybe it is built into some cameras. I don't know. But like when I'm taking a photo, it's hard to, and you can flip it all around, all these different ways
to apply it. I mean, yeah, you're probably better answering that because I've never taken it into consideration.
Yeah. And I guess, so to answer the question of like the golden spiral and how I consider using it when I'm shooting, I just kind of guess. And then most of it is like cropping in post.
For sure.
And I flip it around and I try different things. Like this image I'm actually talking about right here with this dog, he's centered in the image, and there's a lot more of this photo outside of it. And I tried putting him in the bottom corner and all the different corners, and I didn't like how it looked. I like how it looked this way the best.
Interesting.
So in terms of shooting for it, I guess I just shoot a little bit wider and crop in.
I mean, that's the nice thing about big sensors these days.
Yeah.
Is you can always shoot wide and then crop in. But I think it's also important, like, not to subscribe to anything too loyally, because at the same time, you might see that framing end up working for a lot of photos, or for me personally, it'd be like, oh yeah, that's cool. Oh, the rule of thirds, like somebody's off to one side, but then at the same time, I'll try like dead center style of somebody in the frame, and it's like, no, that's the magic. So like it changes every single shot,
Yeah.
But I think that's also the nice part about digital these days, is you can sort of shoot your options on the go and keep like checking your screen to know like, oh no, this feels better. No, this feels better. Or I just have, this endless card so I can shoot both and then figure it out later in the editing room.
I definitely find myself doing that, shooting, especially for stills, shooting, like I might shoot it centered and I might put them on like the bottom right third, and then I might try to kind of get them a little bit further away for the golden spiral thing, and I'd like just shoot different compositions, but also do it in post and play around with those things. And not doing the same thing all the time is probably super important, but playing around with the different composition techniques I think is good too.
Yeah, and then I think if it's like you exercise that enough, and you're gonna know, okay, now I've edited these 100 photos, and the ones that I really love, maybe they always look like the golden spiral, they're always centered, or they're also always tons of extra sky, and then that helps define. Then you have to step outside yourself and be like, okay, this is what I'm showing people, and now this is what they're gonna judge me on and hopefully like me on, is now what I always shoot, the style you do.
Right.
But you got to try everything first.
So we've got like 6 more minutes. There's a couple of questions in here about my hair, which are irrelevant.
It's beautiful when you wear it down.
And thank you. There is one in here about if you still like Baby Bell cheese and honey buns.
Oh, it's pretty amazing still.
And I think that the last good question here is probably, maybe we can talk about is what's your biggest inspo? And you kind of talked about this, but I think that's a more broad question. Like where do you get your biggest inspiration from?
Biggest inspiration, that is pretty broad. I mean, watching everybody else around me, a lot of creative energy. Just seeing, I think creative energy in other people is what inspires me a lot. Like, a dude making a book about pine trees, somebody making a black and white video, just anybody creating something, somebody making a new zine or putting a print on their snowboard or something. Like, just creating is always inspiring, because sometimes you just get stuck in your rut, and I feel like watching other people create can sometimes be like the jump start that you need, that you can't even do for yourself. And then you're like, wow, they're doing this, and almost like this euphoria just helps lift your mood and get you into something where you're like, I gotta create. Yeah,
the idea that there's something that allows you to get into the mode of creating, I think is super powerful, and trying to figure out what that is can be challenging.
Oh yeah.
And doing, looking at and consuming other people's content for me sometimes can be like a juice of being like, I want to get out there and do stuff. But sometimes it can be like the opposite. It can be like, wow, like I suck compared to this person. Or,
it's
like,
definitely dangerous.
Like, that's amazing. And like, I can't do that. Or why didn't I think of that? And like, it's like a coin toss for me in that regard.
Yeah. It definitely can be dangerous. I think that's why I guess I get more inspiration from everything that's non-photography.
Yeah.
Which is like a safer bet. Like if I go watch a movie and sit in a theater for 2 hours, like I get inspired just seeing moving images and like, oh, I could do a photo shoot like that. Oh, something like that.
Yeah.
Or listening to music, just anything where other people are creating. Yeah, that's almost not photography based. So there's no like comparing myself. It's just getting that inspiration.
Yeah, so that makes a lot of sense because then it kind of removes that variable.
Right.
I feel like I try to get inspired and find ideas by removing myself from everything also. And I like to go out in the woods and go hike or like go snowboard and just be quiet and like kind of be away from things. And sometimes that allows my head, and I talked about this in another video at one point, just like giving yourself that space to get creative. I don't know if you ever do that, but like I find that super useful, especially if you maybe you just did this like binge of consumption that is outside of what you're so you're watching films and you're looking at sculptures and
going to a museum,
music, doing that, or like seeing some improv or comedy or whatever.
Sure, yeah.
And then you take that, and then day 3 you go out for a hike for 8 hours,
let it all
and you
sink
just
in.
sit there and you just kind of like let your head, like your mind run,
Definitely. Yeah, I mean, even watching comedians and being like, wow, they have to be fearless to get up in front of an audience, and they could screw it up like live, like and then go for a hike, go for a motorcycle ride, just like clear your mind. And then I feel like more often than not, the inspiration, you get pumped or like ideas just start to pop in your head, and you're like, all right, I gotta go. If that comedian just got up there and did it, then all right, I just have to go take a picture. Why am I not doing this?
Yeah.
Let's get out of this slump and just make anything. Even if you start shooting nothing, like that might be the jump start you need.
I think that what I just said about, consuming and then going out and having that time to think and then the ideas come, that happened when I went to New York a couple weeks ago. I went around with you, went to that museum. We explored some stuff there, and I was hanging out with some other creatives like in that studio that we were staying in. And like I left and I like laid in bed and it was quiet, and then I flew home the next day. And in that window of time, I came up with a bunch of new ideas, 2 of them which I'm starting to execute now, right? So like the dictionary project is something that came out of that time where I was like, I need to do something. What can I do? And I'm just like thinking about that. And if you guys want to see what the dictionary project is, I'll link it above now. It's a new thing that I'm doing, and I'm not going to explain it now, but it's a new creative like outlet to like make
personal
things.
Project. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And that came out of that. And then also, I redid one of my Instagrams to be dogs and beans, and it's just pictures of dogs and coffee. And like that was out of that same thing, because I was like going around this museum looking at this stuff and being like, cool, like this is a picture of like a messy toaster. Okay, like I guess I can just do whatever I want. And then so I drink a lot of coffee and I love dogs, and so I'm shooting like these kind of like candid images of dogs now and putting them on that Dogs and Beans account. And both those things are not for anyone except for me.
For sure.
And they came out of that space where it was like creative, like juices flowing, music, all these things, and then like nothing to do for like 8 hours.
Yeah. I mean, that's why I love going to, New York or Times Square, or even going to like a local mall, like being inundated with advertising, and it's just so much like pounding you over and over and over. And I love like consuming that much at a time. But then you get in an airplane, you're there for 5 hours, and you're probably not going to talk to anybody, or I don't, because I just love to just like be up there. I don't even subscribe to the internet. Just like, nope. Yeah. I'm just going to let it just going to chill, which is nice. And I feel like that's important.
And this is going to be our last thing, because I know you got to run to a meeting. you live in the middle of the country, right? You live in Colorado.
Yeah.
And I think that is such a cool thing and an inspiring thing for someone who's going to get into this industry and say like, oh, I don't have to, like, you're doing big stuff with big agencies in New York and LA, all around the country, and you don't live there. So like, there's this really cool thing about like living where you want to live and living in a place where it's a little bit more, maybe even like you can clear your head more, right?
For sure.
So maybe talk about that quickly, and then I'll let you go.
Yeah, I think it's the important balance that you need to have so you don't burn out, because consuming images and advertising around you is awesome, but also it can just cripple you at the same time. So I think it's a balance for me with commercial photography and the advertising world and getting into that, but then going home and being more like nature-based, like waking up, there are elk just sitting in my front yard, just like, oh, hello. And just, trying to rest a little bit more, as opposed to if I'm on a job, it's usually, working till 1 a.m. and then getting up at 6:30 or 7, just go, which is good for a time, but you can definitely burn out on that, and which is not healthy for any human being. So I think for me, for the longevity of a career, it's good for me to come home to a quieter place and then be able to find inspiration in the advertising world and all of that elsewhere.
Any last things?
I mean, do what you love. I think that's the simplest message I guess I could tell anybody.
Yeah.
And then if you do it long enough, lightning will strike. But patience is key, because dreams don't come quick.
Tell me about it. All right, I'm gonna let you go, and I'll sign off with you guys here in a second.
Sounds good.
All right, so that's gonna wrap up my conversation with Keena today, and I hope you guys liked this. If you do, drop a comment below. Let me know what you thought. I might be doing more of these in the future. If you have any more questions for myself or for Keena, you can drop them below. Please go check out his Instagram. It is dope. Give him a follow on there. Drop him a comment. Say, what's up? Nick's Fort sent me. And if you guys dig this video, you can click that thumbs up. Clickety clackety. If you aren't subscribed, please subscribe below. You can pop on notifications if you dig it. And I hope you guys have a great weekend. Get out there and shoot. Do it. You do you. Peace. Come this way a little bit.
Okay.
It's gonna be awkwardly close.
As
Slide
long as it
that
looks
way.
good on camera.
I'd say like get your arm here.
Ooh.
That looks pretty good. Yeah, I guess this will probably be good for the two of us.
Yeah.
Yeah, it looks good.
Yeah, okay.
All right, cool.
Perfect.